Okay, welcome to the studio review for the Chapter 7 studio on inheritance called Fun with Quizzes. This is a monster of a studio. It's very ambitious because it wants you to start with a blank slate and design a whole program, including multiple classes, some of which may inherit from others, and then also, a whole program to run it, to actually, have user input, pose questions to them and allow them to answer, and you can, grade them and let them know how many they got correct, that sort of thing. So there's a lot involved here. They want you to start at minimum with 3 types of questions that you're going to be able to ask. Multiple choice, where only one answer is correct from several options. A checkbox where you could have, multiple possible correct answers, and then true or false, which of course, only has one possible answer, either true or false. So we need to determine, what do these questions have in common and what are actually different about them. And then we'll have a base class called question that can have everything that's common, and then have subclasses to represent these other questions that might have things that are more specific just to them. So we're going to think about, what the names of our classes will be, what their fields and properties are, what kind of access they have, methods, same thing with the access, and then any sort of inheritance relationship, or I would add composition relationship as well, because they want you to design a quiz class, and you would have a list of questions. So there's going to be a little bit of composition there, where you have, one quiz and many questions. So we want to think about not just how to put the data together, but also how to display the questions, display all the choices. How are we going to actually check and see if an answer is correct or not? There's lots to think about here. So you may want to spend some time, if you haven't started on this yet, just thinking about that, coming up with your own options, and take your time, really think it through, and see what you come up with. And then I'm going to show you what I came up with and also show you how to code it. The other thing to think about is that there are actually bonus missions down here that offer up other types of questions you may want to consider. So what we've got here, it says a short answer type that has some validation to allow them to enter text with less than 80 characters. Maybe a paragraph type they mentioned down here that's similar but allows up to 500 characters. And then a question that would allow somebody to provide a number from like 1 to 3 or 1 to 5. And those types of questions are to me less of a, I'm going to give you some trivia and quiz you on it and grade it. And they're really kind of more like survey type questions possibly. So with that in mind, I'm going to take a dual approach to how I solve this. I'm going to start off just handling the quiz itself with, having a way to grade things and track correct answers and that sort of thing. And of course, we also need a quiz runner class that's going to have that main method that's going to run the program itself. But the quiz class should actually have a method that runs and carries out the quiz, actually looping over the questions and handling all of that. So however you decide to, divvy up all of your fields and methods and things, there's going to be lots of different ways to do this. I'm only going to show you one. So if you want to spend some time on this yourself, go ahead and pause the video, and then you can come back in and see how I plan to do it. Okay, so here's a FigJam that I put together, a quick diagram that just let me put out all of my ideas about what each of these classes would have, what their relationships would be. And of course, I started with that question class and thought, okay, I want to have the actual question to ask, right? That's just a string. I want to have a bunch of choices, and I'm going to actually put those into a map so that I can associate a number with each choice. Because when you're doing a little program with user input in the console, it's useful to have them just give you like a number or a letter or something to represent the choice and not have to type in the entire thing, right? So this will have a way for me to connect those. But you may notice that my choice in this hash map, this is not a string. It's actually a separate class I've decided to create that will allow me to store that string, but also determine whether it's supposed to be correct or not. This was the best way I could think of kind of in my thought process of how to correlate that and then be able to refer to it later to say, okay, this is the choice that they made. Was it correct or not? So I just put together a little class that just has two fields here that will allow me to use these getters to see, what was the content of it and is it correct or not? And then those matching those up with the numbers to make it easy for the user to select one is how I kind of decided to put these together in key value pairs in a hash map. So I'm calling that choice map, and I'm going to, collect all of the choices and put them in that, and then we'll be able to work with that as we're actually carrying out the quiz and asking the questions and presenting the choices. I also decided to come up with another field called max responses because I was thinking about the different types of questions, and while multiple choice and true or false only require a single response, checkbox requires multiple, and we need a way to be able to kind of loop over and decide how many times are we going to keep asking them for additional answers to give them a chance to choose more than one thing. So I'm just going to say we're going to store that number. We can default it to 1 and then just override it in checkbox by using a setter. So that's how we're going to handle that. And then, of course, we're going to have a constructor that is going to allow us to provide that string for the question and provide an array of choices, which we will convert into ultimately being able to set it into this map. We're going to do that through a method down here called create randomized choice map. So this method is going to let us put the questions in a random order before we actually set them in with the numbers, 1, 2, 3, etc., as the keys in those key value pairs. And we'll also at that point take that array that's been passed into the constructor and put those key value pairs into that map. I skipped over this in order to kind of correlate those, but I'm going to require that all classes that are inheriting from this have a toString method of their own, because every single one of them is going to need to say something a little bit different when they're presenting the question and the choices. And you'll notice that I've got this italicized up here, this question. That's because I want this to be an abstract class. I'm never going to create an object from question. I'm only ever going to create objects from its subclasses. So that's why I've done that. And then here is just get formatted choices is a way for me to actually put together the string of having each choice presented on a separate line. So I'm just going to have a little helper method for that that will make it easy for me to include that as part of the toString so that we can print the print the question and all of the choices all at once using toString in each of these. The last instance method here is invalid. And I'm gonna define it here in question so it has a definition that will work for all three of these. And when we get to the bonus missions, I will use this with the other classes to override because they're going to have some different conditions on what we could consider a valid response. But as long as we have choices that they're going to be choosing from, and those choices are being made using those integers that we've put into the maps as the keys, then it's very easy for us to just define something here that says, okay, either they gave us 1 through however many options there are, or they didn't. So if they give us a 0, or if they give us something that can't be converted to an integer at all, or they give us something that's greater than the size of the choice array, we will be able to ask them again because it wasn't valid. So that's going to allow us to put some pretty simple validation in place. Okay, so that's it for the questions for the main part of the assignment. That is how I decided to do this. And you'll see, these use the constructor directly with the question and the choice array. And they also, in this one over here with the checkbox, I actually am going to have a way to check and see how many of them are correct before I override that max responses with a setter that's defined in question. Because remember, I said I was going to default it to 1 because most questions are only going to allow 1 response. But checkbox will have this little method that will allow us to swing through each of those choices, check the choice object itself to see if that particular choice is correct or not. And then if so, we will keep, adding those up. Okay, so let's talk about the quiz. The quiz itself needs to have, as mentioned in here, the quiz needs to have a list of questions. So that's, business number 1, right? So I'll have questions that is an array list of questions. I'm setting it as final. It's generally a good idea to set collections as final because the structure itself, all that means is that it can't be overridden completely with another list. But it certainly allows you to add and remove and manipulate the things inside, even though, the list itself can't be overwritten. So it's generally a good idea to do that. So I'm making that final. And then I'm going to have this number correct that's going to allow us to track. And this, by the way, has nothing to do with this num correct over here. This has to do with how many possibly are correct. This has to do with let's track how many the user is getting correct as they're responding. So we'll have some methods here, adding questions so that we can, take an array and actually dump it into this array list. And I'll show you how to do that using the collections class. And then update score. This actually should not be here anymore. I'm not using it. My bad. There we go. And then run. Run is the method that is actually going to conduct the quiz. It's going to loop through the questions and keep track of, make sure the validation is taking place and keep track of how many they're getting correct and all of that. And, we'll update this num correct as we go through, depending on what their answers are. So that's going to conduct the quiz. And then over in Quiz Runner, all we really have to do is to create a quiz, an instance of this class, and then, maybe have some sort of little intro, create some questions and put them in the, use the add questions here to put them in the questions list. And then we can run it. And then maybe we have some sort of final thing that we say that just kind of tells them how they did. We could use the getter on numcorrect to, determine how many they got and kind of report that back to them. So I'm just going to handle that in Quiz Runner. That's going to be easy. So this is it. This is kind of what I came up with. It may be completely different than what you came up with, what someone else, one of your classmates came up with, and that's totally cool. There are lots of ways to do this. So let me show you how I coded this. I've created a quiz project here. And in my Java folder, I went ahead and created a questions package because I would like for all of my questions to be held out separately, particularly because we're going to have 3 more kinds by the time we get to the bonus mission. I also am going to include this choice since a question is made up of choices. It's composed of choices. We're going to have that in that package as well. And then the only things that will be outside the package is the quiz and the quiz runner. Okay, so I started with creating question, but honestly, the place we really want to start is choice. Because if questions are composed of choices, we need the choices to exist first, right? So let's start with choice. And I'm going to, always refer back to your plans, right? We see here that we need content as a string and correct as a Boolean. They're both intended to be final because we have no intention of changing them once we set them. So I'm going to say private final string content. And then also private final Boolean correct. And it's doing the red squiggly lines because it's saying you haven't initialized this and it's supposed to be final. And that's okay because we're going to do it in the constructor. So I can create a constructor with both of these. Boom, just like that with the generator. And then I can also have a way to do the getters for both of these. But there's one more thing that I want to do. And you'll notice here that I have a second constructor that is simplified, right? So my thought process there was, why don't we have a second constructor that allows us to default correct to false so that the only time we actually use this constructor is when we want to set it to true. That way we're making sure it just defaults. So I'm going to say public choice and do string and content alone, and then I will call this to call the first constructor and just pass in content and false. And that way it'll receive false and set it on correct to this field here. Okay, so that's going to allow us a little bit more flexibility. So there's our choice. That's all there is to it. We just needed those two pieces of information to tie them together. And then it'll be easy for us to check and see when, evaluate whether the user has chosen the correct one or not. Okay, so the question class, this is where we really want to put a lot of good stuff that all of our different types of questions will be able to use because they have them in common. So this is the class that probably takes the most work. So the first thing is to do the question itself. We just want a simple string to say, what are we going to ask the user? And then we'll have a hash map. This is where we're going to correlate an integer along with a choice that will, let me grab the hash map. There we go. Allow them to correlate that number with that choice. I'll call it choice map, and then just make it a new empty hash map. And we're going to, use that other instance method to actually take the choice array and convert everything over and put it in here in a random order with the numbers. All right, private int max responses. And you remember we said we were going to default this to 1 since most questions only allow one response. Okay, so we need 2 constructors. Actually, for right now, we only need 1 constructor because these questions all have choices, right? When we get to the bonus mission, we'll do a second one. Okay, so I'm gonna type this one out because it's kind of specialized. I'm not going to use the generator. Question, we definitely want to take that in as a parameter. And then here's where it's different. We're going to actually take this in these choices in as an array of choice objects, and then use our other method to put them into the map. So we'll set question directly. This one's pretty normal. But then for the choice array, we're going to need to develop our create randomized choice map instance method here in order to do that and make sure that they're all placed into that array from this array placed into the map from the array. Okay, so we'll do that in a minute. We're going to come back to that. Let's go ahead and do our getters for both, actually for all 3. And then I can do just a setter for max response because we know we're going to want to override that for checkboxes since we can allow multiple responses for that. So we'll have a setter for that one. And then we said we wanted to require all of these subclasses of question to define toString, but I'm going to make it abstract so that we're not defining it here. So I'm just going to say override, and I have to put that because toString actually comes from the object class, so we're overriding it just by doing it this way. But all I'm going to do is come up with this signature and declare it. And IntelliJ is smart and just pointed out to me that I can't make this abstract unless the class is abstract. So I'm going to come up here and add that on. I missed that earlier. Okay, so now we have an abstract class with an abstract method, and it'll be defined in the subclasses. Perfect. Okay, so here's where we're going to create this create randomized choice map. So I'm going to, it's void create randomized choice map. And we're going to pass in an array of choice objects. And then we will say we would like to, we're going to kind of, as a go-between with the array and the map, we're going to convert this into an array of choices, excuse me, an array list of choices. And I failed to import that properly. There we go. I do that a lot. I just go too fast. Okay, and we'll just have a new array list that's empty. And then what we're going to do is use collections class has this handy dandy add all where you can give it the list that you want things added to, and then give it the array that you want the stuff to come from. And it dumps everything from the array into the list. And now you've got yourself an array list. So it's very useful. And then, of course, we also said we wanted this to be randomized, right? So I'm going to shuffle it. And collections has a method for that as well. So it's another reason to put it into an array list instead of just taking the choices directly and putting them into the hash map, is because I want to shuffle them first. And this is the easiest way to do it. So we will shuffle them. And then we can do a classic loop here with I, because I want to take advantage of that to set those integers into the map, right? So we're going to start with I equals 0 and go to choice list.size. However many choices there are, that's how many we want to go through here. And finish this up with the incrementation, and then we can just say that we want the map to have a key value pair of I plus 1. And then we'll go into the choice list and say, get me the, oops, I spelled that wrong. There we go. Go get me the element that's at index I. And that's what I want the value to be in this key value pair. So this is how we are correlating the number that is going to be presented to the user to just put in as their input for this choice. And yeah, so now we'll have a choice object here as the value and an integer as the key. And that is going to be super useful for our next instance method, which is get formatted choices. So this is where we're going to actually make it pretty and display them the way we want to. This was all about just making sure that data could be put into those key value pairs in the map. Now we have to have something that's going to focus more on displaying it for the user. So I'm going to call that get formatted choices. And I'm going to use String Builder. You guys have seen me use String Builder before. It's a fantastic class when you want to loop through a list of something and add on to a string a little bit at a time. Okay, so I'm also going to use this new line variable and use system.line separator. This is something that LaunchCode is asking you to use in graded assignment 2. So I'm going to model that for you. And because I want to use it multiple times, a lot of the times I'll just set it into a variable instead. So now this is where I loop through the list. I'm going to say for each choice number that's in the key set of the map. So we're going to go to the choice map.keyset. We're going to create a string that we can kind of piece it all together, and then we'll tack that onto our string builder object. So string choice is, I'm going to use the tab escape character, so it'll be tabbed over a little bit. We'll use choice num directly. That's the integer. That's the key from our choice map. And then I'm going to have a little space and a dash and another space. And then I'll go to the choice map and say, get me the value that's at that particular key. And then remember, that value is a choice object, right? An object of the choice class, which has content and is correct, right? Or correct. So I'm going to say get content. We're interested in the string that is the actual choice that we want to present to the user. So we can do it with get content. Okay. And then I can just add on one last little new line there and append it. So formatted choices is my string builder object. I'm going to say append and then give it that string I just created choice. So it loops through and builds us a string for every single choice with its corresponding number. And then we will have a whole string builder object that's made up of all of those pieces, and we can return it. But one of the things you need to remember about string builder is not string, so you actually have to convert it back to a string unless you're concatenating it with something directly. And we're returning just the string, so we need to explicitly call toString here to do that. Okay, so we have one more method to write. I told you that a question was a longer class, and it is. We want this is invalid method that returns a Boolean true or false. So I'm going to say, I'm going to give you a response. And remember I said that the responses were going to be these numbers, right? For reasons that will become more clear when we actually get into the bonus missions, I'm going to actually accept all the responses as strings initially, and then test them to see if they can be converted into integers. So the best way to do that is to have it be a string initially. So I'm going to use a try catch and say, okay, first, just try seeing if you can actually parse this as an integer. So I'm going to use integer.parseInt to do this and give it the response, because this requires a string, right? And then we'll just return the Boolean value that results from this expression that we write, which is, the response integer is less than or equal to 0, or the response integer is greater than the size of the choice map. And that way it'll say, okay, if they give us a response that's less than 1 or greater than the number of choices available, because we're actually numbering them starting with 1 and not with 0, then that'll return true and say, yes, this is invalid. But if neither of these things are true, it's going to return false, and that means it is invalid. So, excuse me, it is valid. Yes. Now we do the catch, and we're just going to catch a number format exception, which is what happens if it can't convert it into an integer with integer.parseInt. And if that happens, instead, we're just going to return true. Okay. Because it's definitely invalid if it can't be parsed into an integer. Whereas here, we're going to, try some other criteria before we decide if it's true or false. Okay, so this is going to work well for our 3 question types that we've got here: multiple choice, true or false, or checkbox. So there's no reason to override that in these classes. We can just use what's built into question that we just defined. All right, so now we've got a question class. It's abstract, and it's ready for us to create subclasses from it. All right, so I'm going to come up here, and we're going to go and create our first subclass. I'm going to do multiple choice first, I think. All right. And we're going to make sure to extend the question, because we want everything that question has to offer first. And then we can kind of go from there. So we don't have any additional fields for this, but because a question has an explicit constructor, we have to have one here too. In fact, Well, I was going to say we could use the generator, but once again, we could use the generator, but I'm typing it. That's all right. Maybe we'll do that in the next one. All right, and then I just call super and say, pass along the question in the choice array, and just do it as defined in question, and that's all that's required. Now, here's where you'll notice this is still red up here. It's because it's telling us that we have to either make this an abstract class or we have to implement that abstract method toString, because we required it of the subclasses by making it abstract in question. So no problem, we are going to do that now. So I'm going to say override, and then public string toString has to have the same signature. The other way that you could do this if you wanted to is to use the generator. Oop, Mandan, there we go. And say implement methods here. And it picks up on the fact that toString is required by question. So you can just do it there, and then all you have to do is actually fill out the body. But you have exactly the right signature that matches what's required in question. All right, so I'm going to create another one of those new line things here because I'm going to use it several times. And then I'll return a string and say, let's start with a new line to put some space up front, and then say choose one, and then do another new line to go to the next line. And then we will present the question to the user. So I'm just going to use the getter for question and just say, you know, go get that question for me. And then on the next line, we're going to get the formatted choices. So we already did all the work in question to allow us to present all of those key value pairs, the numbers and the choices together, that the content of those choices. And so that's all we have to do is just use it, because this is available to us directly since we are extending question to this class. Okay, so choose one. That's the part that is unique to multiple choice here. That's all we have to do. So we've got ourselves a multiple choice class. Let's do the next one, true, false. It's going to be very similar. True or false. We're going to extend question again. And then here, I'm literally going to copy all of this, and we'll just make small changes because it really is so similar. So I need to make sure this is true or false. So it has the same name as the class. And then down here, instead of saying choose one, I'm going to say true or false. And that's really the only difference I need out of this toString. I want it to otherwise present it exactly the same way. So that's true or false. And now we can go do the third one, which is checkbox. And this is the one where we're going to be overriding the value of max responses because we can allow more than one response. So let's create a new class, checkbox, and we'll extend question. Okay, and we can start here, no problem. And we could say, you know, in here, choose one or more when we first present the question. And that'll be, you know, unique, but we need to do a little bit more because we need to allow them to have more than one. So the only thing we really have to do is call, you know, when we're creating the object in the constructor, after we have, you know, called super and created the object, we can say set max responses, and we're going to give it a number here, but we need to get that number. We need to calculate that number. And for now, the best way to do that is to say, let's just look and see how many are correct. If we go through all of the choices that are in the choice map for the question and take note of how many of them are correct, that will enable us to come up with that number, and then we can just call this method from here and set that number here. Okay, so let's do it. I'm going to say this is public int get num correct. And so I'm going to say give me correct, and We'll track the number with that. This is going to be kind of an accumulator pattern, right? You learned about this in Unit 1, where you loop through and you add something up and just keep accumulating. Okay, so get choice map, and then we're going to actually go through the values because we're interested in the choices that are stored as the values in those maps, not so much interested in the key, which is the integer. This we really do want to actually look at the choices because we need access to that is correct getter. So we'll say if choice is correct, then increase num correct, right? We'll just use that here, and I have reassigned local variable. Okay. And then we're going to return it. Okay. So this is pretty straightforward. You're just going through the choices, checking to see if they're correct, adding it up, and then we'll just return that. So now we can call this from here. It's expecting an integer, so this will work perfectly, and just say get num correct, and that's all we have to do. When we get to the bonus mission, we're going to modify this just a little bit, but for now this will work because we are working under the assumption that everything is to be graded for this quiz, right? Okay, so that'll let us know exactly how many they get to guess for. And the only reason we might break out of letting them continue to guess is if they get one of them wrong, and then there's just no point in keeping asking for the other ones. But we'll deal with that in quiz, which is where we're headed next. So we've done all three of our question types here, and using these choices. Now it's time to go over to quiz and allow for an array list of question objects, a way to track how many they're getting correct as we're running the quiz, and then a way to add questions before we start running the quiz. So let's do that. All right, so outside of questions, we've got our questions. Outside of that, in the Java package, I want to just say that we want a class called quiz, and we're going to start off with our fields, right? Private final array list of question objects, and say, let's collect a bunch of questions that we can then turn around and present to the user. All right, we'll start with an empty array list because we're going to use our method add questions to actually put them in there later. And then the other one is the number correct as we're going along, tracking how many they're getting right. Okay. We can use the default constructor here. I'm just going to see default constructor is sufficient. And then we can just have getters for our two fields so that we can have access to them. That's all we really need there. And then the add questions is going to be public void add questions. I could probably take the public off if I wanted to, because quiz runner is going to be part of the same package, but it's fine. And then we'll say, okay, we're going to provide, much like we did with the choices, we're going to provide an array of questions that we can then flip over into an array list. And so again, I'll use collections add all so that we can say I have a list of questions and I would like to dump the question array contents into it. All right, so that'll convert it. This really should say add questions plural. So let's fix that. Okay. And then of course there's run. So this is the big one. This is where we're going to just run the entire thing. And you know how normally we say, keep your methods small, they should have one job. Well, this one has one job. It just has a really big job. So it's going to have a lot of lines of code, but such is life. Okay. Public void, there we go. No return value, we're just running the quiz. All right, So when we're getting user input, you may recall we need the scanner class. We're going to start with that. I'm going to call it input and say it's a new scanner, and I want it to get the input from the user. So I'm going to use system.in to accomplish that. And then I'm also, before I get started, I would like to use the collections class again to shuffle all of my questions. So we're just going to do that. We'll shuffle the questions before we actually get started. For quiz, I think, like if this was like a trivia type thing, right? That kind of makes sense. So the first thing we do is print the question for the user. And remember, we already planned ahead and made it possible. If we go and look at question, we made it possible we required it here, but we need to look at one of these to actually see it. Yeah. We planned ahead by having toString present not just the question that we're asking, but also all the formatted choices that we, have this little thing to do. So all we have to do is print the question object, and it'll call that toString for us. So I can come back over here to quiz and say print question. I mean, literally, that's all I have to do. I failed to do something important. Okay. We have to loop through the questions. Sorry about that. Question out of questions. Okay. So we're going to look at each question object one at a time, and this is how we're going to cycle through, right? So if you're wondering about that, now you know. It was just a mistake on my part. Okay. So we're going question by questions. So we'll print the question, and then we want to get and evaluate responses, and also validate while we're at it. We made a way to do that as well. So I'm going to say that for every question, we're going to have an array list of integers that allows us to check the user responses. Let's see, user responses. And you're like, but Carrie, didn't you say that your user responses were going to be strings? And I would say, yeah, I know. But we, again, need to work with them sometimes as integers and sometimes as strings. So I'm just going to store them that way. Okay, so we're going to start with an I for a way to, we're going to use a while loop, but I still need a way to track kind of which iteration we're on in case there are multiple responses allowed, like for a checkbox. So we'll say while I is less than question.get max responses. And if it's starting out with 0 and max responses is the default 1, then this is only going to run once as long as they get it right. So we'll say, okay, we're going to have a user response. We haven't collected it yet, but I'm just going to declare it. So the first thing to do is to validate. I'm going to use a do while loop for this because it means, definitely run this code once, but you can run it again if it meets this condition. Question dot is invalid, user response. So we're going to give that user response once we ask for it in here to this method of the question class, and whatever basis it's checking it on, which of course the default one in question is just to say, is it in range? Is that that user response number in range? This is where we're going to take a moment to say, please enter a number, to make it clear that we're asking them to give us the number and not the actual content itself. And yeah, that'll work. Okay. And then I'm going to say user response equals input.next line. Next line will return a string. It makes sure if they have, for any reason, they have spaces in there, it just grabs the whole thing, but that's what we want. And then we can use this method to check and say, okay, is it valid? Can it be converted into a number? Because remember, we defined this to say, first try and see if it can be converted into a number. If it can't, then return true, it's invalid. If it can be converted into a number, then we just need to make sure it's in range. Make sure it's at least 1 and no greater than the size of the map for the number of choices that are available. Okay, so let's go back to quiz, and that takes care of our validation. Then we want to evaluate the response based on whether it's correct or not. So I'm going to, at this point, go ahead and convert the user response. Now that we know that it is a number, we can convert it into one safely without having to do another try catch. And now I can work with it as a number, which is going to be useful for my hash map. Okay. So we'll say if the responses that we're collecting from the user, that's right here, this array list. If user responses already contains the user response number, in case they guess the same thing twice when they have multiple options, then we can just print a little message. So this is kind of just a preemptive, hey, you already got that one, to give them a chance to guess again. And in this case, because we're giving them a second chance, we're not going to increment I up. So it's just going to cycle around and start at the top here again. But if they didn't already guess it, then it's a matter of checking to see if it's correct, right? So we'll say else if the question is not correct. And so we're going to have to go through a little bit of some method chaining here, but follow the logic. We're going to the question, we're using get choice map to access the choices. We're going to get the specific key value pair, the value that is at that user response number that they gave us, that has been validated as, definitely exists as a key in that map. And then we'll check is correct for that choice that's that value. Okay, and say, if it's correct, this is why I tied this together in the first place, right? Sorry, I put a bang in front of that. So this is where we're checking if it's not correct. I just said if it's correct. If it's not correct, then we want to print something that just says, sorry, the correct answer was, and then we can give them, the feedback. And so to do that, all we really have to do is just go through all of the choices that are in the map. It's like I need to, there we go. In this case, I want to go straight to the value so I can get a list of those choices so we can loop through them. And then I'll just say if choice is correct, then print the content, get content. So I'm using those getters, tapping into that choice object as we look at each one and only printing the ones that actually say that they're correct. Okay, so that's number two. They did guess something they had not guessed before, but it's actually wrong. And so now we handle, and also, sorry, also we want to break out of the loop, because at this point, there's no point in continuing on with this question. If they got it wrong, we're going to move along to the next question. Otherwise, we want to just say, correct. Good job. And then we will add add that response to the user responses. So, the reason that all of this is necessary, all of this checking around, and really this entire loop is just because of the checkbox class. If it was just about multiple choice and true or false, we wouldn't have to do any of this. But because we can potentially have multiple responses, we're gonna, have to do some of this extra work just to make sure it's possible for them to continue back around until they've either gotten it wrong or gotten all of them right, if there's more than one. But this all works in a way that it still works when there's, only one possible response that they can give us that would be correct. Okay, so we're going to add that, and that way, when we come back around, we have a way to check, have they already given us that one? And then we just need to check and say, if as long as we are not yet looping back around. No, I said that backwards. The purpose of this is to see if we finally got the very last answer. Like, let's say there's 2 possible correct answers out of 5, right? This is going to check and say, are we actually on the last one? Is it just the max response is -1? And if so, then that means that we can go ahead and say, okay, they got them all correct. We're going to add to their score. So I'm just going to increase num correct. That's that field that we're storing up here that we started out at 0. So if it is, then the only thing left to do here is to increase I in case there are more possible opportunities for them to give additional correct answers. Okay, so that was a little complex, I know. But again, most of that was necessary just because of the checkbox option to be able to, give them the opportunity to have multiple responses. Okay. The last thing that I need to do down here, because I didn't do it yet, and I should have at the very beginning, was to say input.close. We always want to close the scanner when we're done. But that's after it goes through all the questions. So this will loop through again, question by question. When it's on a question, it will ask as many times as there are correct responses. And it validates and gives them a chance to put in more input if they actually give something that's not valid. Then we just check to see if it was correct or not. And then once we're done with that, we move on to the next question and so on and so forth. And again, I'm going to save the grading of it and just do that in Quiz Runner. But this is all that's needed to run the quiz, loop through all the questions and get all the answers from the user. And just track, how many they're getting correct. So we're good there. So the last class we need is Quiz Runner. This is going to have our main method in it. So the first thing that I'm going to do in the Quiz Runner class is to create my quiz even before I create main. So we're going to create the quiz right here. It's going to be static because it's part of a static class. We're not creating instances of Quiz Runner. But I want a quiz object quiz to be a new quiz. And remember, quiz has a default constructor, so this is all we have to do. And then we can have our public static void main method. That's where we're going to actually execute this code to run our program. So we've got 3 things to do here. We're going to create questions. Then we're going to add the questions to the quiz, to the list of questions in the quiz. And then we will interact with the user. So we have to set it up before we can actually run the quiz. All right, so this will be running the quiz and giving the score at the end. Okay. So let's start at the top. For the sake of time, let's see, I will walk you through this first one, and then I'm going to paste in the other ones. Let's start by doing a checkbox question, since it's one of the more interesting ones. So I'm going to say, which of the following are books by Jane Austen? That's the string that I want to add in is the question itself. And then I need to make that choice array. So I'm going to say, I want to create objects, choice objects, and create a whole array of them. So I'm going to create an array, and then I'm going to use these fancy brackets so that I can just apply those values now and create it all at once. So I'm going to create a new choice and give it Jane Eyre, and then going to do another choice, Pride and Prejudice. And if you know your Jane Austen, you know that that one is true. And remember, I created 2 constructors so that if I leave the second one off, it automatically makes it false. So I only have to say true here for the ones that are actually the correct answer. We'll have a third choice that is Wives and Daughters, which was written by Elizabeth Gaskell. So that is false. And then we're going to have Mansfield Park, which is in fact true. Okay, and I forgot a comma here, so let me fix that. There we go. So we're taking 4 choices, putting them in this choice array, and then we're going to be able to give the question and the choice array to the actual checkbox object. So we'll create a checkbox, question 1, and I'm going to say it's a new checkbox. I want it to take the string, and I want to take the choices. Okay. So hopefully you followed kind of what I was doing there. That's how I'm setting up one of these questions. I just wanted to, make it nice and neat and easy to read. So I did these in 2 separate sections here, and then I just added them right here. Otherwise, this would have been really convoluted. Okay. Always choose more readability over the lines of code consideration. It's actually okay to have more lines of code if it's more readable. All right, we're going to create 2 more. I'm going to use this exact same process. And so you can see here that we've got a true or false question we're creating and a multiple choice question I'm creating. So I'm just doing one of each. And I'm using the same process. I create the question itself, the string that is for that, the choice array, and then feed that in to create each of these objects, all of which inherit from question, right? Checkbox, true or false, and multiple choice inherit from the question class. So now, because of that, I can actually add question objects to this quiz, no matter which subclass they are. So we're going to say, let's start with that quiz we created way up here, right? And call the add questions method we wrote that will use that collections to turn, take that question array and dump it into the array list. And so I'm going to say new question and a question array specifically. All right. And then I'm going to just define it right here and say question 1, question 2, question 3. And there's the array. Oops, I see. I accidentally ended up with 2 brackets. That's why it's confused. Okay. Yeah, there you go. So I'm giving it that array of questions, and that's what add questions expects is an array. And then if you remember what we did, oops, I need to gain quiz. Here we go. What we did was we said accept the array and then use collections.addAll to take the array questions and dump them into the array list. And now they're stored as part of our quiz in this questions list. Okay. So if we go back over to Quiz Runner, we have now added questions to the quiz. The last thing to do here is to interact with the user. We have done pretty much all the work that we need to do for this because we already put it all in quiz.run. So all we have to do is call it and let it run. And then we can finish up. I'm going to create another one of these line separators here to have some flexibility with the way that I format this. And then I'm just going to, print a little message after the quiz is done that says you answered quiz.getNum correct. So this is going to tell me how many they got correct that we were keeping track of in the quiz. And I'm going to say of, and this is where I can say quiz.getQuestions and then take the size of how many questions there were in the first place. And then I can tack on questions correctly. Thanks for playing. And then I'll just do one more new line for good measure. I like to keep things nice and separated and clean in the console to make it easier for the user to read. Okay, so that was a lot there, hey, but this, we could test this now. We actually got a main method that runs the quiz. Let's give it a whirl and see if I made any mistakes. All right, looks like we're good. Except that it put choose one or more in here and then it immediately printed true or false. without actually giving me a chance to answer the first one. So we definitely have something going on here. Let me put this back down. And this is probably something to do with the way that run is written. So let me take a look here. Okay, so it looked like it wasn't even printing the responses. Let's look at question here. I should be formatting them, but it has to have them first. Okay, so here's where IntelliJ can help you out. You see how this is gray and not blue like this one? It means that it's never getting called. So I suspect, yes. All right. I said that we were going to set, take the choices and set them into the map, but that we needed to write this first. And then I never came back and actually did that. So we need to call create randomized choice map here and give it that choice array. And now I think we'll find when we go back to Quiz Runner and run this. Yeah, here we go. So which of the following are books by Jane Austen? I'm going to go the happy path and do the ones that are correct first. So 2, correct. Now it's giving me a chance to enter another number. This is why we did all that looping. And I'm going to say 4, and it's going to say correct. And then it asks me a new question. What poem did history-making poet Amanda Gorman recite at the U.S. presidential inauguration in 2021? And the answer is The Hill We Climb. Correct. True or false? The most published author of all time is Agatha Christie. That is absolutely true. 1. Other than Shakespeare and the Bible. You answered 3 of 3 questions correctly. Thanks for playing. Okay. So we've done that, but we don't want to stop there. We don't just want to test what happens when it works. We also want to just try it out and run it again. Let's check our validation. We want to say, what happens if I put the letter A in? It asks me again, please enter a number. If I put 0 in, please enter a number. If I put 7 in. So it's only going to accept 1 through 4 because we wrote that validation that way, which is really great. Okay. This is how you make your code resilient and make it work for the user. Okay, so now I can answer. So let's say I am on, this is one where there's 2 different choices that are correct. Let's say I get the first one wrong. Yeah, it immediately exits because we put that break in there and tells us, sorry, the correct answer was, and then lists both of them for us. Now it asks the next question. And of course, if I get this wrong, it'll just, say, sorry, the correct answer was. Okay, you answered 1 of 3 questions correctly. Thanks for playing. So this is a pretty good way to kind of just temporarily test this. Of course, I haven't written any unit tests. That's a whole nother thing for another day. It's actually in the bonus missions, but we are not going to get there because we have so much still to do for the other bonus missions. So we are going to, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to come over here and code, let's say coded first part of Studio Solution. I'm just going to get my version control cleared out here and clear all of this red that we were seeing up there. Great. Okay, so we can kind of see now, as we're going to be adding some new things, we'll be able to pick those out a little more easily. All right, so this takes care of the main part of the assignment. Now we can come down and talk about these bonus missions. So what I do want to do, again, I'm not going to do the JUnit tests. I have done lots of tests in some of my other lectures and in the last studio. So I'm going to just focus on these other answer types. So you remember I said I thought that the short answer and paragraph and linear scale, the kinds of things that might lend themselves a little better to like something like a survey where you're not actually grading it, you're just collecting the answers. That's the approach that I want to take. And it'll maybe that's how you did your quiz to begin with, and that's totally cool. So I wanted to show this as an option. So here is my FigJam for adding this in. In the questions, you'll see we have 3 more question types: short answer, paragraph, and linear scale. And then over here, I'm inheriting, I'm using quiz for survey, but I'm going to override the run because we're not going to be grading anything. So we don't need some of that logic in there. I also want to be able to collect the responses as opposed to just temporarily, grading them and keeping track of how many were right. So I'm going to just use, this all responses array list of strings to do that. And then over in the survey runner, we will actually create a survey, add the questions, and then run it. And then I can print out, the responses at the end to kind of confirm, here's all the answers you gave me. So it's a different approach, a different type of way to do a question and answer sequence. So the things that are going to be different about short answer, paragraph, and linear scale. For one thing, short answer and paragraph, you allow one answer. We've already written this, so it'll accept strings, so that's no problem. But we do want to override the is invalid methods that are in question because they're going to be giving us just text, right? Like a sentence or a paragraph. So it's not on the basis of is it a number that's within range. We actually want to validate it based on the number of characters. And in the instructions, they said for short answer, that's less than 80. For paragraph, it's less than 500. So we'll override is invalid for those. And then for linear scale, we actually need to know what scale to create it on. So I have an additional parameter here called highest num. It's a field that will say, okay, what's the highest number? And then we can create that range from 1 to that number and use that as the basis for the is invalid here instead of using the size of a choice array, because we don't have choices with something like this. You also will notice that because we don't have choices, I have a different constructor here that I'm using that doesn't require you to pass that in. So I've added a second constructor to question to be able to handle that. So there's going to be a few little changes here that we're making to these classes to make this work, but it should all still work. And if we do it right, we can continue to use multiple choice and true or false and checkbox for surveys. We just won't, we won't set anything correct when we create the choices, and we won't bother to grade it when we run the survey. So let's kick over to here and take a look at what this is going to be like. So you remember I said that the first thing we need to do is to add and question a second. I'm going to close some of these here. To add a second constructor. So right here, I'm going to say for questions without choices, we're going to have public question, string question, and not require a choice array. And so, normally when you have a second overloaded constructor, you might call the first constructor and pass things in. In this case, that's not very useful. So I'm just going to set question independently. And I'm just going to leave the choice map alone because it's already has a value as an empty hash map, and that's fine. We're just going to ignore it when we're using those kinds of questions. But we have this alternate thing so that we can just set that string without having to worry about the choice array. And also, for all of 3 of these question types, we only want to have exactly one answer. There's not going to be any looping required for that. And so this default value of max responses will be just fine for those 3. Okay, so we've made that change to question. That's going to help. Now we need to create our 3 questions: short answer, paragraph, and linear scale. So short answer extends question, right? It's just warning us that we have a 2-string we're going to have to define, which is no problem at all. And so I can actually just do public short answer and say we just want to have a string that's a question. So we just need to have the exact same signature as this second constructor that we created in question, and then we can just pass that question to it. Okay, let's overwrite our 2-string since that's required. and say, you know, public string to string. I'm going to do something different here for these types of questions. Before I was I had some text that I put in, and then I gave the question, and then I gave the choices. And this is going to look different. We don't have choices for one thing. So instead, I'm going to say, let's return new line plus get question. We'll just ask the question first and say another new line, and then please enter a response. And this is where we're going to be very customized. I'm going to say 80 characters max. So this is very specific to a short answer. And then we'll just add on a new line there. And that'll do it. Okay. Now this is where we're going to override something that is defined for the first time in question, which is this public Boolean is invalid method. And it takes a string response. And we're only interested on it on the basis of the number of characters. It has nothing to do with numbers for this type of question. So we're just going to say, get the response of the length, check it against 80. And if it is greater than or equal to 80, not enough spaces, too many spaces. Okay. Then it'll return true. It is invalid. If it is less than 80, it'll return false. No, it is not invalid. Okay. So that's all we need to do for that. Paragraph is going to be very similar. Extend question there. Okay. In fact, I'm going to go to short answer, and I'm just going to copy this because it really is almost identical. And the only thing we'll have to do is just make sure that the constructor has the same name as the class. And then here, we're just going to say 500 characters max. And then down here for the validation, again, we'll change 80 to 500. And it'll just evaluate it based on the length. Otherwise, we don't care what characters are in there, and they don't have to be numbers. Okay, so far this is going quickly. Let's get into the linear scale, which is going to just have a minor modification. Extend question. And this is where we said we need a highest num int here, a new field. So I'm going to say int highest num. And I'm going to declare it, but I'm not going to initialize it. But I do want to make it private and final. We're going to set it and it's not going to change. Okay, so I can do a quick constructor here, where I accept both the question and that highest num that I need, and then pass question to the constructor for super, and then just set highest num here where it belongs, since it's not part of question. And then I'll just have, you know, my getter for this, since that one again exists here for the first time. And now we can override the toString. Let me go ahead and grab what we've got for short answer. We're going to do it a little bit similar to short answer and paragraph for toString. So we'll start here, but I'm going to say, please enter a number from 1 to, and then I'm going to go get highest num, and then finish with that colon and then a new line. So that'll be customized for this particular class. And then when we override is invalid, it's actually going to be a lot closer to what we have in the original parent class, because we are dealing with a number, but we don't have a choice map. So we can't use this because it can't base it on anything. We actually are going to need instead to base it on highest number. So I'm just going to change choice map dot size here to highest num. And that is all I need to do to make this work, where it'll make sure that the user is giving us a number that's in the correct range. Okay, so we have our 3 types of questions created. Now we just need to create a survey that is going to inherit from quiz. So let's do that. And again, I'm going to do this outside the questions package here. I'm going to create it in Java. And it's going to extend quiz, if I can spell it right. There we go. All right. So we have some things from quiz that we know we can continue using, like, having an array list of questions. But we are going to want our own field here that does not belong to quiz. That's going to be an additional array list where we can collect all of the responses for the survey. So we're going to have an array list of strings. What I'm going to do is, this is going to hold basically a string that we're going to build that has both the question and their response together in one string, which, if you were working with a database, would probably not be how you'd want to do it. You'd want to create a hash map and have them, or have like a class of something that you could, create objects of to store the 2 together and correlate them. But for our purposes, that's going to be more complicated than we really need to do. This thing is already pretty dang complicated. So we can just have a getter for this that returns the entire array list. That's pretty straightforward. Me and these zeros. I don't know why that keeps happening. All right. And now all that's left to do is to override run. We do not want to use the run that's in quiz, because it includes, evaluating for correct responses. We're not interested in that. So we're going to have something a little bit different. So I'm going to use override and say, let's override run. So public void run. And there again, seriously, guys, don't know why that keeps happening. I don't know if it's something I'm doing while I'm typing or if my keyboard is having issues. Okay. So we do need a scanner. That part's the same. So we're going to say scanner input equals a new scanner from system.in. And then I'm going to loop over the questions. That's pretty much the same as before. And only this time I can't just say questions. I have to say get questions, because it's actually coming from the base class quiz. Okay. I'm going to need a variable to track looping for something like a checkbox question if we have multiple allowed responses. And then I'm just going to print the question right up front. And this is where we'll do our do while, right? And this is going to be similar to before, where we're really just checking for question and the max responses. This again is all purely because of the checkbox question. It's the only one that allows multiple responses. And I is less than question max responses. Oh, IntelliJ is so intelligent that it's warning me that I haven't done things yet. I'm like, well, of course I haven't done things. Give me a second. All right, so we will loop as long as there are multiple possible options, and we're going to collect their response right up front and put that next line as a string. And this next line is very important for allowing these types of questions, because short answer and paragraph have lots of words with spaces potentially. And so if you use next, it's only going to take them word by word, but next line will take the entire thing as a single string. Okay, so we'll do that. And then here's something we're going to do. We are going to eventually tell them at the end that they can stop giving us answers in this loop if they say done instead of giving us something else. So we're going to have to check for that and say if user response, and I'm going to say, I could do like 2 lowercase and equals, but Java actually has this thing called equals ignore case that you can just use and just say done. And that way it doesn't matter what it is, it's just going to automatically compare them without making them case sensitive. So we're going to preemptively say, if they said done, if that was their response, then we're just going to break out of here. Otherwise, let's do the business of actually getting their response and validating it and everything, right? So let's do a quick loop to just make sure we can keep asking for their response if it's not valid. Once we've determined that it's not done, the string done. So this will just allow us to just say something about it not being valid. I am going to put system.line separator. I think I only need one of these, so I can just do that. That response is invalid. Please try again. Oops. And then here, we can just ask for it again, just like we did before, and it doesn't have to be complicated this way. So then once they've given it to us and we definitely got something valid, we can just print something to let them know we've got it. Got it. Because we can't say correct, right? Because we're not doing correct and incorrect here. Okay. The next thing that we want to do after we've gotten it from them is grab that content and put it in the responses. But here's the thing. If they answer something that's like a number, where it's, they're giving us an integer to represent a choice as part of like a choice map, the response that we really want to store in all responses here is going to be the string that's the value of that key value pair and not the key, which is just the integer, because then it doesn't make any sense. The integer doesn't mean anything. The only time the integer means something is if it's literally, we ask them to give us a number, like on the linear scale, or we ask them for short answer or paragraph, and they immediately give us the user response as a string, and that's what we want to keep. So we have 2 different types of responses here. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work before we can add their response to all responses to find out which kind is it. Do we want to just take the response as it is, as a string, or do we want to use it as a key and go into the choice map and get the actual content of that choice and put that in instead? So the way we can do this is to take advantage of instance of, because we have 3 classes that we know are going to be where we want to just grab what they give us and not go look anything up with a choice array, right? So we're going to say if question is an instance of short answer, or if questions is an instance of paragraph, or if question is an instance of linear scale, because that one we just want the number they give us. There are no choices to look at. Then content is just going, I'm sorry, I forgot to declare content. I want to do that first. So let me just do that here. We're going to have a string content. Content in this case is just going to be user response if it's one of these, because there's no choices to go look up. Otherwise, if there are choices that we need to look up, we're going to say that we're going to take their response and say question.getQuestion and tack on, I'm sorry, I went too far. This is for after we get done with this. No, what we want to do is use that integer.parseInt to change this over and say, take their perfectly valid integer that they gave us as their response for one of these choice questions, and convert that string into a number so that we can then use it as the key. And then we're going to go say the content is going to be, go to the choice map, use the number to look up the value for this key, and then get the content. And that's the string that we want the content to be from that choice that they gave us. Okay, so once we have that, content is going to have one of these two values, because this is an if or an else. It's a binary choice. So let's now say, okay, we want the entire response that we're going to throw into that all responses array list to be the question first. And then we'll put a colon and a space, and then tack on, and that was supposed to be a plus sign, so let me fix that. Plus the content, whatever the content is. If it's what they gave us, or if it's the value of the key they gave us. And then we'll say all responses dot add, just to use the regular add method that belongs to the ArrayList class, and add response. And then we can increment I for the next go around in case this is a checkbox. All right. And then the last thing to do before we end this do while loop here is to say something to them about if this is a checkbox, we want to make sure that they know that they can actually exit out if they're done giving us the responses, because with something like a checkbox, if it's a survey style, it's not like there's only two that are correct. They could choose all of them if they want to. And so we're actually going to amend that method that checks for that, and make sure that it's okay to say that highest number is going to be the max allowed instead. So we'll go over and fix that in a minute. So we're going to check for that and say if we still have more potential responses because we're less than max after having incremented I, and it's an instance of checkbox, then we're going to print something to them to let them know what they can do to exit out if they are done. So we'll say select another by number or enter done. There we go. So this will just be optional. It'll only print when they're answering that type of question, and they could still possibly give us more selections. All right, and then all of this is the same. And then the last thing we do down here, of course, is to, oh my goodness. Here we go, input dot close. And then I see a wayward semicolon there, so I'll fix that. Okay, so there again, in order for this to work where a checkbox is going to be able to be used this way, we need to go and amend it. So I'm going to go back over to questions and go to checkbox. And right here where we say we're returning number correct, if there are in fact none that are correct after it looks through the choices that we're offering, we need to allow for it to just be the number of total choices that there are instead, so that they can choose as many as they want. So we'll say, I'm going to use a ternary expression here and just say, if num correct is greater than 0, then give num correct. But if it's not, we're going to go and we're actually going to just say, let's go to the, let's see, what's going to be the easiest way to do this? We don't have access to the choice array here, but we can do the choice map. So I'll say get choice map dot size. As many choices, as many key value pairs are in that map, that's how many choices that they could possibly choose. And we want them to be able to choose all of them if there are no choices. So, and nothing is correct. Sorry, not if there are no choices, clearly there are, but if none of them were marked correct because it's just not that kind of quiz, that's what we're allowing for here. We're making this flexible so it can be used with both a quiz and a survey. Okay, trying to remember if there's anything else that I need to amend in order to make this work for the survey. I don't think so. So we've got survey done, which means the only last thing to do is the survey runner. So we need to create a survey runner. It's going to work similarly to the quiz number, but it's going to have different questions and a different kind of intro and outro and that sort of thing. So we'll create survey runner. And before I do anything else, before I create my main class, I'm going to create a static survey, private, static, final, survey. Remember, when something is both static and final, it's essentially a constant. And that's what you want for a collection like this, where you don't want it to be overwritten entirely. You only want it to be able to add and remove things and that sort of thing. All right, and then we'll do our public static void main to get something we can execute for the entire application. And then we will create the questions. This is going to be similar to what we did before. Create questions, and then add the questions to the survey, and then interact with the user. And in this case, that's going to be, we're going to do a little intro, then we're going to run the survey, and then we'll do a little outro, and that'll finish us off. Okay. Almost there, guys. I am, for the sake of time, because this is a very long review, I'm going to go ahead and just copy in all of these questions that I've created, because you've seen me do this before now. It's the same process for the choice ones. I do have to make sure all of these imports are in here. Oops. All right. Okay. So it caught on. It's got everything else added here. Oh yeah. Eventually I got to the number and it just said, you know what? Import everything from questions. So, which is probably what I should have done in the first place. So now we have all of the classes that are defined in questions. And I've got one of everything. So for the ones that are choices, I created the choice array. I didn't create a separate variable for the question. I went ahead and just put that string in here and then gave it this. But you'll notice for true and false, I wanted to have two true or false questions. I really only need the same exact choices here because I'm not checking whether either one of them are correct. So I can just create it this way and use it twice. So I used it for each. Then I have another set of choices for our multiple choice question here. I've got a linear scale that just gives a highest number of 3, so they can choose 1, 2, or 3. Some choices here that are for checkbox where they can choose 1 or more, or none, I guess, for that matter. They could just say done and be done. And then short answer where they can give us something up to 80 characters, and comments as a paragraph that can give us up to 500. So we've got all our questions. Now we just need to add them to the survey. This is going to be similar to the way we did the quiz because add questions is something that is inherited from quiz. So I'm just going to say survey, add questions, and I'm going to say I need a new question array. And I want it to include all of these different questions that I wrote above. So flavor, scoops, toppings. We have an ice cream theme in case you didn't catch on to that. Flavor suggestion and comments. Okay. So we have all of our questions thrown into this array of questions. We're passing that into add questions, and it's going to use collections.addAll to throw them into the questions array list that is part of the class. Okay, now we can interact with the user. I'm going to create a new line using system.line separator. I'll use this a lot. I'm going to print, thank you for registering. So this is, the idea here is that we're going to have some sort of get together with people. So registering for our meetup. We will be serving dessert and would like to know your preferences ahead of time. Okay. And then I'm going to add one more new line. Okay, so that should take care of that. And then on the next line here, we can just run the survey. So survey.run. And then we'll close by having the new line and saying, thank you. Your preferences have been noted for the upcoming events. And of course, we didn't really do anything with them. We collected them. But we don't have a database or any sort of like, we're not making any sort of call to an API or anything. So really all we have here is just an opportunity to just give them back. Here's everything you answered. So we're going to do that. So this is where it's going to come in handy to use string.join and say, I have this new line character. I want that to be my thing that joins all of the elements together from survey.getAllResponses. So we're going to go get that array list of strings and tie them together with new lines so that they'll each appear on a new line. And then we'll just do one more new line at the end for good measure. And I think I forgot a plus sign here, so let me fix that. Okay, I think we're ready to go. Let's run this and see if it goes, unless there's something that I failed to update. Okay, thank you for registering for our meetup. I have a typo, I'll have to fix that. Let's see, where is it? Our meetup. There we go. Okay, true or false? I am lactose intolerant and need a non-dairy alternative. That is true. True or false? I am diabetic and need a no sugar added alternative. Also true. What flavor of ice cream would you like? I would like chocolate, please. How many scoops of ice cream would you like? Please enter a number from 1 to 3. So I know you can see now how all of our different overridden toString methods are serving us well, because every single question type has a different format and that suits it. And so that's really useful. Okay, select some toppings. So this is a checkbox. This is where I'm going to have multiple options. I'm going to choose strawberry slices and pecans. And then I'm going to say I'm done. And then it'll go to the next question. What flavor of ice cream would you like to see added to our menu? And so I could say pistachio. That's a nummy one. And then any other questions or comments? Nope. And it looks like this didn't quite line up right. Let's see, your preferences have been noted for the upcoming event. It did put everything together. It looks like I've got extra colons in some places because some of these already had colons. That's okay. These are little tiny things that I could fix to make sure they're consistent from one to the next. I am surprised that these are not tabbed. Oh, that's why I put the tab in the wrong place. Okay, if I really want for this to be, let's see, new line, join them with new line and tab. Yeah, I want to take this and also add it here so that the delimiter is a new line and a tab. And I think when I run this again, let's see. All right, so let's try this out. So I'm going to say fresh strawberry and pecans. I'm done. What flavor would I like? Pistachio. Nope. Yeah, now everything is on a unique line. So that's kind of what I was looking for. Everything's, clearly a part of this list. And I could have gone even further and put like, some sort of other character here. But you get the idea, right? We're able to provide that feedback, spit all this back out and say, here were all the information you gave us, and we're done. Okay, so this has been very thorough. I hope that, I know it's been long, but the last time I did one of these reviews, I did not even bother to do the bonus missions because I was doing it live in class and we just did not have the time. So I wanted to take the time to really do this up right, make sure that it covers most of what they have here. The only thing, again, I did not do was the tests, but that's just, I have given you lots and lots of examples of tests in other places, so I'm not worried about that. All right, I hope this has been helpful and I will see you in the next one.